Aloha class. I'm just going to be teaching about the bringing peace into the room reading. Excuse me, and the main points of it. The reading talks about how the mediator creates an atmosphere conducive to resolution, and it talks about how in learning how to mediate, we go through 3 stages of development in becoming mediators. And in the first stage, we study technique and we learn the tools that we need to use and different tools that we can use in our mediation. And then in the second stage, we learn about how and why mediation works. And we find, the reading says, to seek to find an intellectual grasp of the mediation process. So it's kind of more making it like figuring out for yourself like why mediation works. And then for the third stage, being a mediator, we emphasize and italicize the word being because it more so like becomes a part of who you are. It's not simply just doing the steps that you're told to do. It's now like becoming a part of who you are and your belief system. And so the mediator's way of being as experienced by the parties is what sends the main message, the reading says. The reading mentions that there is a placebo effect that could be possible, which means that like there could be a resolution. Some disputes are resolved even if the mediator is not present, so it's a possibility. It also talks about the Hawthorne effect. So the Hawthorne effect means that people change their behavior when they realize they're being observed. There's a negative and positive Hawthorne effect. The negative Hawthorne effect talks about how parties seem to be more difficult when there's a third party there, so they don't want to negotiate, they don't want to change their views or anything like that or compromise at all. A possible reason that the reading gave for this is that they may have other goals and other agendas other than solving the conflict at hand. So yeah, the presence of the observer can either have a positive or negative influence on the mediation. Also, the reverse Hawthorne effect is when the personal qualities of the parties influence the mediator. So like if the parties had views that the mediator didn't agree with and they let that affect their mediation, then that is a reverse Hawthorne effect. Excuse me. The systemic perspective shifts the focus from the interests of the individual parties to the set of interactions and relationships of the parties and the mediator. So the mediator is not extrinsic to the conflict. So you can't separate completely the mediator and the conflict. Like they're interacted and they have many ways that they influence each other. And so they're not two separate entities. They're definitely intermingled in a lot of different ways. So the feelings that the reading argues that the feelings that the mediator has may be important in the mediation, so that they should be recognized and used in a smart way instead of just ignored and put aside. The reading talks a lot about subtle influences that the mediator has on the mediation and the parties. They need to be able to recognize that they do have an influence and be careful about that. And there's no way to not have any influence whatsoever on the mediation of the parties as a mediator because you're involved in the process, so you're obviously going to have some sort of influence on it. And talks about how presence is an essential characteristic that the mediator needs to bring. They need to be composed and centered and make contact with the humanity of the clients. They need to integrate their values into their mediation style so that it's a more personal thing as well. Excuse me. They need to constantly be aware of the connection with the people whose conflicts that we mediate. So we need to constantly be aware that we do have connections with them. We aren't completely separate. We need to be able to manage those connections. Reading makes reference to the new sciences and talks about how we can't maintain the division between the observer and the observed anymore, and talks about this symbiogenesis. And then it closes out talking about the personal qualities of the mediator and how the mediation influences the mediator, but the mediator also influences the mediation, so they kind of have an effect on each other, so they're not mutually exclusive. And also talks about there's different values that mediation tends to encourage in the mediators, things like seeing conflict as positive, diversity and difference, valuing openness, honesty, and empathy, and agreement and commonality and cooperation and collaboration, all those types of things. So it talks about mediation can change you, but you can also change the process of mediation. So it's a way of personalizing it. So thank you very much.